Well, it's finally done, so we can finally talk about whether it was good. In my personal, professional opinion, it was awesome. It was. Now, I want us to be very clear about who exactly I'm complimenting, because I do believe that the only reason UEFA has done what it's done and changed the Champions League is you get bigger matches earlier and you get more matches. That's more money, right? The only reason that they've done that is more money. So all we're left to do is react to the new Champions League format and what it means for our enjoyment of the game. And I thought it was great. I think UEFA's accidentally done something great here. A lot of chaos. It was very difficult to follow. Fortunately, CBS had a Galazzo show, so I actually had the audio up on that the whole time. I had other games up that I was able to kind of look in and see how they were doing. Key games like the Manchester City one, but the CBS Galazzo show was actually whipping around to all of the different goals. That was very helpful to help follow this. A bunch of sites crashed, the betting site crashed, Flash Score crashed, and I think that indicates that I am not alone in my feeling that this was awesome. What this felt like was a day of March Madness, except it only lasted 90 minutes. Like, if you wonder why Americans love March Madness so much, it's because you basically get to do this for 4 straight days, all day from 12 to 12. There's constantly a game. Somebody's constantly being eliminated. It is a chaotic feeling where you're trying to keep up with it. You're watching it and work on your phone. Like, it is complete chaos. And this felt, as an American, a lot like one day that was just very March Madness-y. What is going on? Somebody outside is blasting music at a heinous level. We'll dive into the actual matches and what they meant. Some of the key matches. Aston Villa against Celtic. This ended up being a huge match right on the border of the top 8 because everybody was paying attention to the Manchester City storyline, which was very, very interesting. But there are 3 tiers that you can end up in this system. You can end up in the top 8, you can end up in 9 to 16 where you were a seeded team, and then you can end up in 17 to 24 where you were an unseeded team. From what I've seen, apparently you can get a little more specific than that, so I'm going to Google it right now so I can tell you what the hell's going on. So there's a pairing system that I'm looking at right now, which is basically if you finish 9th or 10th, you are paired against potentially 23rd or 24th, 11th and 12th, 21st and 22nd. So it's not just pots that will be drawn randomly. So 9 to 16, you'd technically rather be in 9-10 than 11-12, right? That makes sense. But as you'll see, some teams are just going to get screwed and some teams are just going to get really lucky. And that's how this is always going to work. And there are obviously some surprise teams that ended up making it to the knockouts. But starting with Aston Villa Celtic, great match. Hat trick for Morgan Rogers. Villa takes a 2-0 lead. Adam Ida, who I hadn't heard of, I didn't even know he was on Celtic. He pops up with 2 goals right before the half. I thought I freaking recognized that guy. Former Football Manager starlet, right, drags Celtic back into it. Celtic didn't need this one. They're just playing for seeding. They're playing to try and be one of the seeded teams in the playoff round. They had a fringe shot at being able to make it to the top 8. Even if they'd won this match, they wouldn't have made it to the top 8 based on goal difference. So really nothing lost for them. They ended up, except there is, we'll get to that. They ended up losing 4-2, goal from Ollie Watkins, atrocious penalty miss, and then goal from Morgan Rogers. The win puts Aston Villa into the top 8 because a couple of results conspired against everybody else. This is a massive result for Villa. Really, really impressive for them to be able to put themselves in this position. Liverpool and Arsenal, obviously the other 2 English teams outside Man City, that managed to get themselves through. That means 3 of the 8 teams that are going straight through to the round of 16 are from the Premier League. The only one missing out is Manchester City. Then we have Barcelona and Atalanta. This is one of the matches that really contributed to Aston Villa being able to get a top 8 finish. It ended up being a 2-2 draw. Atalanta, which started the day in the top 8, falls out of it. They are the highest goal difference team on 15 points. Teams on 16 points that slip in because Atalanta kind of drops off. Bayer Leverkusen, Lille, and Villa. They could have finished as high as 6th if they'd managed to score a goal. They would have got ahead of all 3 of those teams, but instead they are in 9th and coupled with Borussia Dortmund, and they're going to be seeded to play against either Sporting or Club Brugge. That's their situation. This was a fun match, though. Barcelona was playing to be able to be on the top of the table because Liverpool somehow fumbled and was losing, right? And it went back and forth, and Atalanta scored in the 79th minute, which definitely was going to give It was going to give Aston Villa something to think about. Bayer Leverkusen took care of business against Sparta Prague. They needed to win. They had one of the better draws of teams competing for a top 8 finish. They needed to win and make sure that all hell didn't break loose. All hell didn't break loose, and Bayer Leverkusen is going to be waiting in 6th. They are not just a one-season wonder. Bayern Munich needed to win and help. They were going to win. It would be stunning if they didn't beat Slovan Bratislava, who finishes at the bottom of the table with literally 0 points. 0 points minus 20 goal difference, right? They scored a late, beautiful goal to make things a little spicy, but Bayern Munich really let this slip with their loss to Feyenoord. If they had beaten them, Villa would not be in the top 8. Bayern Munich would be in the top 8 instead. And, outside of that, they lose to Feyenoord 3-0. So now they show up, they win in the final match day, and they end up finishing in 12th, which couples them actually with Real Madrid, which really unlucky. Right, forever finished 22nd and 21st, which we are going to get to that because Real Madrid, they are the favorite against Stade Brestois. There was a chance where this looked like it was going to be 1-1. Stade Brestois scored a pretty lovely goal, but it ended up being called back for offside, and then Real Madrid was able to pile on 2 in the second half with Jude Bellingham and Rodrigo. And that now puts them in 11th. Real Madrid needed help. They needed a couple more teams like a Bayer Leverkusen, right, like an Aston Villa, to lose in order to sneak into the top 8. They didn't get it. So if you're Bayern Munich, you're Real Madrid, you're very disappointed that you have to play in the playoff round, and you're particularly disappointed with how things have gone against you, right? And that is because Manchester City did end up doing the deed. They played against Club Brugge, and they went down. They were down 1-0, and I can't even imagine what it was like at halftime. They were losing. They needed multiple goals. They got them. I ended up getting a third goal late to kind of put it away, and it was a weird match because Club Brugge just needed to avoid losing by a lot to get knocked out at this point in the process. And so Club Brugge really wasn't trying to find any goals late in the game, and Manchester City was able to just hang on. They end up on 11 points, which puts them firmly in 22nd. And if you're picking up on what I was putting down earlier, that means Manchester City is going to play either Real Madrid or Bayern Munich in the playoff round, which is nuts. The other team that's going to be there is Celtic, which is the team that lost to Aston Villa. We were talking about that earlier. That means Celtic is going to play Bayern Munich or Real Madrid in a Champions League knockout match. Stupid unlucky. Club Brugge is the last team in, technically. They were looking pretty good earlier, and they were not guaranteed in before because Dinamo Zagreb could have won by more goals, but unfortunately for Dinamo Zagreb, they only managed to squeak by AC Milan in a huge upset win 2-1. Big mistake early to give Baturina his first goal. Yunus Musa gets a second yellow on what was a bit of a flop, but Musa was getting a little handsy for already being on a yellow card. If you didn't give it as a second yellow, I wouldn't have been stunned. Pulisic's goal was just kind of bad goalkeeping on Zagreb's front, but they're able to scrap out a win. Unfortunately, and I feel terrible for them, the win was not enough. They needed to win by more goals. 4 teams finished on 11 points. Zagreb's goal difference is the worst of those 4 teams, so they are the only team on 11 points to miss out on the knockouts entirely, with Brugge, Sporting, and Man City slipping through ahead of them. And that was a near-run thing, because that Sporting match, they were losing. They went down in the 21st minute against Bologna, who's a team that was already out in the competition. They had no chance of qualifying mathematically until Sporting found a goal in the 77th minute that would end up being the difference. Like, if you look, even though Brugge finished last, the real 2 teams that had movement here right at the end were Sporting and Zagreb. Zagreb was already winning, and if Sporting didn't win, Zagreb was going to jump in as the last team to qualify. But Sporting held on. They managed to get a 1-1 result and avoid 4 consecutive losses to fall out of the knockouts entirely, which would have obviously been a disaster. On the bright side, though, a couple of teams that did well. Borussia Dortmund. Okay, they won 3-1 against Shakhtar Donetsk, who had a very faint mathematical chance of making the knockouts. That went away early. It was 2-0 at halftime. Guirassy with a couple of goals for Dortmund. And for various moments, they were in the top 8, but because teams like Bayer Leverkusen, teams like Aston Villa were actually able to go win matches, right? Everybody kind of in this area was winning. Dortmund fell back down to 10th, but they are going to be drawn against Sporting or Club Brugge in the first knockout round. That's a pretty good spot to land. They dodged Manchester City based off the way things fell, so they will be a favorite, I would imagine, to go through to the round of 16 based off where they've landed because they got that win. And then Arsenal, they had a very faint possibility of getting knocked out. They danced around it. They gave up an early goal to Danjuma, but they scored 2 goals before the half. This was a spicy second half. There was a goal that Girona scored that was later called back for offsides, and then Sterling missed a penalty. But Arsenal got the job done on the road against a team from a top 5 league, even though Girona is definitely the weakest top 5 league team in the Champions League this year, in my opinion. They seem to have been a bit of a one-season wonder, and Arsenal just took care of business. That notched them the top 8 finish. Inter also was able to do the same. This was not easy. Monaco made it easier with a 12th-minute red card, and Inter waltzed to a 3-0 win to guarantee themselves a finish in the top 8 as well. They were in a pretty good spot. It turns out they would have qualified no matter what happened, but if Atalanta had scored and Inter had lost, things could have gotten... And, it was mathematically possible that Inter could be eliminated. Now, for Monaco, kind of sucks, right? It's a bad loss. They end up slipping down because they lost by 3 goals here, and Benfica managed to win against Juventus, which I don't think a lot of people saw coming. They're now in 17th. They're going to get drawn against Benfica or PSG. I think if they get Benfica, that could be a really great tie, but the way PSG was playing today, I don't think anybody wants to play them. And that's PSG blowing out Stuttgart. Ousmane Dembele had a hat trick. He earned it. He was amazing. Like the Ousmane Dembele that Barcelona thought they were going to get when they spent over $100 million on him. He was that good. And if he's playing like that, PSG really can win the Champions League. I'm not kidding. They look like that type of team. Stuttgart is not a pushover. I know they're not a big brand name, but they finished ahead of Bayern Munich in the league last year. They haven't been quite the same team in the Bundesliga this year, but they are still very good. I was surprised that they didn't manage to make the knockouts, and they were in it up to this point, right? This was the big 6-pointer that was right at the elimination zone, and it could have been very spicy. It could have been very interesting. If PSG loses this match, they're out. Instead, they are in the seeded half of the draw. That's how much of a swing can happen in one match here on the last day. And Stuttgart ends up in 26th behind Dinamo Zagreb. And they just have themselves to blame, right? They lost 5-1 to Red Star in one of the fluke results of the entire tournament earlier. And if they find a way to get a draw in that match, they would be through and Club Brugge would be out. So that's a very bitter pill to swallow for Stuttgart. And unfortunately, what looked like it could have been one of the most entertaining matches of the entire process ended up being one of the most boring. Speaking of boring matches, Lille beat Feyenoord 6-1. The announcers at the time called it a capitulation, and it really was. I thought Feyenoord, after the result that they got last time, I thought could be... They were in a running for a top 8 finish, right? If they win this match, they're on 16 points. Okay, and let's say Villa goes out and draws or something, the Feyenoord would have been right there. They could have actually jumped up and been in 9th if they'd won this match. They would have gone ahead of Lille, actually, and so they would have been in 8th. Boom. But Lille wins the match, things go their way, and Lille, who beat Real Madrid earlier in this competition, blows out Feyenoord, who just beat Bayern Munich 3-0 in their previous match. Top 8 finish. Miraculous, impressive. They're the only French team that ended up finishing the top 8. Monaco flirted with it. Brest flirted with it. PSG never flirted with it. But Lille is the only French team that is going to be sitting around watching everybody else play. They're waiting in the last 16. They get more TV money. They get more competition prize money. They've got to be incredibly happy with the way that went. And then there was Benfica and Juventus. This was a really disappointing result for Juventus. If Benfica loses this, by the way, they're out. Okay, because they would have been behind Dinamo Zagreb. Benfica is one of the teams that had to deliver a result. They were on the road in Turin, and they went in 1-2-0. That is a big-time result for Benfica. It sets them up against potentially Monaco or Stade Brestois, which is definitely a match that Benfica can win to get to the last 16 of the Champions League. That's a weird little coupling in there that PSG is definitely going to be feeling good about. But Benfica putting itself all the way up in 16th after, if they lose this match, they are quite literally out, is great. And for Juventus, they fall down into the coupling with Feyenoord here at 19-20, which is going to pit them against either AC Milan or PSV. Obviously, you would prefer PSV, but would you really? Because they just beat Liverpool, who had won their first 7 matches in the Champions League. Now, obviously, Liverpool's taking it easy. They ended up winning the group anyways, which doesn't give you anything particularly special, right? But they're the only team to finish over 20 points because they won 7 of their 8 matches, but they did lose this one. PSV, thanks to a goal from Ricardo Pepi and an assist from Ricardo Pepi and a beautiful goal from Johan Bakayoko, They came from behind 2 separate times, and all the action was in the first half here. The second half was way more understated, but that result was obviously very important for PSG because it's put them into that 14th position where they're going to be able to go up against either Feyenoord or Juventus. Now, they're probably a little frustrated Juventus has fallen down into that bracket, but don't worry, it could be worse. If you're in the next bracket, then you're playing against Manchester City, and we all know that's definitely not a position that you want to be in. A couple of other results to get to round things out. 2 teams that were already eliminated. Red Star beat Young Boys 1-0, meaning 2 teams finished with 0 points. Slovan Bratislava of the Slovakian League and Young Boys from the Swiss League. Red Star with a couple of nice results. They end up with 2 wins, including that other shock win over Stuttgart that ended up knocking them out. And a nice win for the reigning Austrian champs, Sturm Graz, over, they clearly hate Red Bull teams because they compete against Salzburg in their league, but they beat RB Leipzig, rounding out, undoubtedly, one of the most disappointing Champions League campaigns I have ever seen. RB Leipzig played 7 matches. Their only win was against Sporting. They lost the other 7. They're finishing below Sparta Prague, Sturm Graz, Red Star, Shakhtar Donetsk, Club Brugge. The list goes on, right? They're level on points with Salzburg, which is basically their younger brother coming out of the Austrian league. Okay, in Leipzig is not Girona, right? Because they're tied with Girona. But if you look at the Bundesliga standings, you will see, right? Leipzig is in 5th place. Now, they've lost 2 of their last 3. They actually were in the Champions League places for most of the season. I could not tell you what happened. But this is not a ringing endorsement of the depth and quality of the Bundesliga this year, that Stuttgart in 4th, Leipzig in 5th are plummeting out. You've got Dortmund, who's having an atrocious year, firing its coach, that is making it into the Champions League knockouts in a pretty solid position. Of course, Leverkusen and Bayern seem to just be different gravy. Those are the 2 good teams in Germany now. But Leipzig finishing on 3 points. I mean, at least Stuttgart was in it on the final day. Can you blame them for losing to PSG? No, you can blame them for their other losses, like Red Star, which I continue to point out. But Leipzig was never in it. They were terrible the whole time. They lost their first 6 matches, first 5 or 6 matches in this competition. I just don't understand what the hell happened to them. And then the other match we didn't talk about was Atletico Madrid. Griezmann had a first half brace, and they just cruised. They weren't mathematically guaranteed in the top 8, playing a team that was already eliminated. They put themselves in the top 8, and Diego Simeone still somehow is, underrated for his consistency in delivering a very competitive product with Atletico Madrid. They did a fabulous job. And this final day, it was great. Not every match was great. And the one match I thought could be the most interesting, Stuttgart and PSG, was a complete blowout. But the full credit goes to Dinamo Zagreb for being the first team out. They did everything they could to try and make this as interesting as possible. And Manchester City, they stared into the abyss. They were 45 minutes away from the unthinkable. They managed to pull themselves out. They showed something of the heart of the champion to at least make it to the knockouts. But if they can get through Real Madrid and Bayern Munich, that would be something else. Because that matchup's going to happen. If we get Manchester City, Real Madrid in the playoff round, that's going to be absolutely patently insane. Now, if you get Manchester City and Real Madrid in the playoff round, that could be the same round that you have a match like Stade Brestois Benfica. You could be watching Feyenoord against, I guess it would have to be AC Milan in that particular case. You have Borussia Dortmund against Club Brugge in the same round as Manchester City against Real Madrid. I don't know why they did this kind of pot seeding. It's weird. I don't like it. But this was a lot of fun. And the amount that teams moved, like Benfica could have been out, and now they're all the way up in 16th. This is a very close table. I feel like in the future, some of these tables might not be this close.